The Carrier Empath. The Carrier Empath is a particular type of empathetic individual who naturally gains the attention of our kind. Our kind are drawn to empathetic individuals who fall within one of the classes of empath. Those classes consist of the empath, the super empath, and the codependent. And I will, in due course, in other recordings, go into greater detail about those particular classes. The Carrier Empath is a particular division of those classes and therefore can be found amidst any of them. The Carrier Empath is not a standalone form of empath, but rather is embodied by exhibiting carrier tendencies which bolt on to the relevant class of empathic individual. The Carrier Empath shoulders, more than others, the emotional burden. This person rarely talks about themselves, although they have much they could talk about, either as a consequence of their natural intelligence, which lends itself to considerable discourse, their ability to connect with people and engage in what could be termed as small talk, so people are put at ease, or because of their extensive experiences, they have much they could share with other people. The Carrier Empath does not see it as necessary to talk about themselves. All empaths are good listeners. It is one of the empathic traits which our kind look for. But the Carrier Empath is a superlative listener. Exhibiting considerable patience, he or she will sit and listen to the woes and problems of others. They do not jump to conclusions, as many people would, instinctively forming a view of the person that they are engaging with within moments of meeting. Instead, the Carrier Empath is able to resist making an early judgment about this person and will listen to what they have to say so they can best work out how to assist. The Carrier Empath knows full well that sometimes just being listened to is the best thing for another person. Those with carrier tendencies are work-like in their approach, reliable, organized, and effective when facing pressure. They regard it as their role to take on responsibility for others and struggle to determine the boundary of when they should not do so. They are unable to avoid taking on other people's issues and problems and feel a need to assist, but to do so through actions and a practical application of their compassion, honesty, decency, and understanding. The Carrier Empath is not a person who overflows with emotion, but is certainly not devoid of it. Their emotion does not appear in surges and spikes, histrionic reactions as a consequence of the situation which they find themselves in, but rather as a steady and reliable provider of fuel, through their evident compassion and supportive nature. Whilst caught in the dizzying devaluation, some empaths will find themselves despairing and having up days and down days, whilst they experience the push and pull behaviours. The Carrier Empath adopts a stoic approach. Inside, he or she may be churning, but they do their best to maintain a brave face, as they seek to remain dependable and forging forward. This person is solid and dependable. They are not a dullard, but they do not shine and glow like other empathic individuals. They are grounded, practical, pragmatic, and excellent problem solvers. The Carrier Empath is unable to leave responsibility with others. They regard it as their task to be responsible for other people, and they rarely judge the flaws of others, but rather see it as an opportunity for them to shoulder the burden. They will remain with those who suffer from addictions, seeing it as part of their obligation to remain and fight the fight on behalf of the afflicted. The Carrier Empath readily takes on the problems of others, and will do so even when this becomes a drain on his or her resources, such as time or money. They may have somewhere they need to be, but if the telephone call is continuing because the caller needs help and assistance, the Carrier Empath will continue to listen. There is a strong sense of obligation on the part of the Carrier Empath. Whilst empaths as a whole feel obligation, the empath will assist because they feel good about doing so. In a way, they gain a form of fuel of their own from helping others. The codependent will usually help because he or she has to do so, being of a giving nature, in order to find validation for themselves in terms of their place in the order of things. The super empath relish the challenge that is represented and regards it as an opportunity to exhibit their powers. Layer the carrier empath onto any of those classes and you add a complexion of obligation. The relevant class of empath does it because that is what should be done, that is the right thing to do, and they have an obligation to care. They will recognize that the task in hand may be difficult. They will note that it will drain them, but their fearsome sense of duty causes them to be the first to volunteer and the last to give up. This division of empathetic individual is certainly compassionate, but approaches matters in a practical manner rather than hearts and flowers. Whilst they will certainly use words to comfort, to support and to show empathy, they prefer to rely on actions. If someone is suffering, rather than handing out tea and sympathy, the carrier empath will assume the mantle of the problem themselves and tackle it head on. They are especially apt at standing in the shoes of somebody in order to absorb the blast on behalf of someone who is struggling or wants their help. They are the proverbial person who would take a bullet. The carrier empath has significant reserves of inner strength, but is unable to regulate the use of this strength, since they tend to be blinded by their need to resolve the problem, often expecting no assistance at all from the person being helped, and therefore they will keep going until they have depleted their resources and a sudden collapse ensues. Such individuals are prized by our kind, but by certain narcissists in particular. There is the provision of fuel that always has to be there, but it does not always fountain from the carrier empath. Graders tend not to choose those with carrier empath tendencies as a primary source because the gushing appreciation is not the style of the carrier empath. Furthermore, the grader tends to be more resourceful and therefore has less need of this element of the carrier empath. Instead, the carrier empath is desired by the lesser and mid-range schools, and especially so by the cadre of the victim narcissist. The victim narcissist derives fuel from the provision of care and compassion. His less impressive countenance is not one which results in gushing praise and over-the-top appreciation. Accordingly, the exhibition of care and compassion gives him the fuel he wants, plus the residual benefits he requires, and this is always preferable to the empath who gushes with praise but does little in the way of practical care. Thus, those with carrier tendencies are more suited to the victim narcissist. Furthermore, the carrier empath comes with considerable residual benefits in terms of the provision of caring for someone with poor health, dealing with chores and problems on that person's behalf, providing food, shelter, money, and such like. And therefore this raft of residual benefits appeals to lesser narcissists in particular, and naturally the victim narcissist that hails from the lesser school. The carrier's capacity for taking the bullet results in them also having appeal to the mid-range narcissist. The passive-aggressive mid-range narcissist, who finds that he is not able to get his way with a third party, will invariably turn to the carrier empath to step up on his or her behalf and get the problem sorted. If weakened from a lack of fuel and potential criticism from this third party, the mid-ranger will turn to the carrier empath to make everything all right again, and the carrier empath will dutifully attend to this. During devaluation, the carrier empath is wounded and confused by the manipulations used against him or her, but their sense of duty carries them forward, and they will often fall victim to the narcissist's capacity to blame others. Accordingly, if the narcissist blames his outburst on being overworked, the carrier empath will accept this explanation and will look at ways at alleviating the load on the narcissist by taking more on him or herself, or even going so far as to challenge the boss of the narcissist to secure a reduction in his or her workload. The narcissist knows that with a carrier empath, he can in effect point that person in the direction of a problem, and the carrier empath will march into battle on his behalf. Again, this is why the greater narcissist has less of a need for those with carrier tendencies, and why those of a lesser or mid-range school have more reliance on the carrier. Devaluation causes those with carrier tendencies to battle on in the hope of resolving the narcissist's problems. The carrier is less inclined to blame themselves. They do not see themselves as the cause of the problems which the narcissist alludes to during devaluation, but rather only blame themselves for not resolving those problems. The carrier is blinded to understanding that there is no fix, but regards every problem as having a solution, which will, with the right application of energy and resource, eventually present itself. The worse the narcissist becomes during devaluation, the more those with the carrier tendency will apply themselves to trying to sort the problem out, and usually identifies an external source, wrongly, as the source of the problem, and is ultimately sent on a wild goose chase, trying to tackle this external source while the problems continue unabated. If the relevant narcissist does not have a primary source with carrier tendencies, it is likely that one will be recruited as a secondary source. This is more likely with the greater, who will prefer the primary source to be fountaining with fuel, rather than providing a host of residual benefits, and to have a secondary source who can be turned to as and when required, perhaps at moments of crisis, be utilised for the carrier traits. Whilst the lesser and mid-range narcissist, and especially the victim narcissist cadre of those two schools, will want a carrier empath as a primary source, the greater will position one as a secondary source, since they make excellent lieutenants. It is common to find that the scapegoated child of the narcissist, if they avoid becoming a narcissist themselves, tends to exhibit strong carrier tendencies, because they realise by getting things done, having to attend to their own needs because the narcissistic parent has abandoned their duties at an early stage, and also having to parent the narcissistic parent, is the most effective method of survival. They care, but do so without showiness, and deliver in a practical and dependable manner. It is also worth noting that as some narcissists age, they will gravitate more to securing a primary source who is a carrier empath. Though fuel remains important, the need for the residual benefits becomes increasingly important for those narcissists who see their looks fading, their mobility decreasing, and therefore suffer a reduction in their ability to charm and attract. Of course, this is not applicable to all of our kind, since many become distinguished with age, have the magnetism that comes from financial power and their innate charisma, and their sharp minds remain undulled. However, for those that see the waning of their powers, the carrier empath becomes more attractive to them.